Hello everybody, welcome to my acrylic painting class. And today we're looking at some gorgeous mountains, some Spanish mountains and the valley and a place called Guadalest, south of Spain. And I have quite a plain in color, quite monochromatic image in front of me today. And I have a gray background, but I'd love to show you how we can develop a variety of bold and exciting colors when we paint in something from maybe less in color exciting image. Okay, we might have been on the spot and we might have seen much more bolder colors. Sometimes the camera doesn't pick it up. Sometimes photographing things black and white is exciting just to come up with your own scheme of colors. So what I'd like us to do, I'd like us to sketch the composition first, and then start working with blocks of kind of sections of painting and interpret the elements we see slightly stronger in color. And I'll talk you through that. Right, so I have a range of brushes today, and I'm going to start with my round synthetic brush to sketch. So I'll use a little bit of white and some ochre and a dab of violet to do my sketchy line. I apologize for my alarm system being tested today. So if you can hear it in the background, hopefully it should be stopping shortly. Right, but let's focus on our drawing. So first of all, this is a gorgeous silhouette of the rocks, which is here on the left hand side, and there is a big gorge, big drop, and the two rocks part in there, and we see a village in the far back and another mountain. So let's start finding that big silhouette of the outer range of the cliffs here. So overall, I might just block it and think of it as a big shape first, which is coming a little bit further than halfway through my board. So a little bit halfway through, and it will start dropping down. And then if I were to divide my board again halfway through, but horizontally. So let's find where that's what might be, about somewhere here. So it's roughly where we're going to have a stop of that drop. It's not going to be straight. I'm just looking for it generally. And then another rock on the other side starts. Okay. And yes, maybe those angles will be slightly different here. We can work into them a little bit more afterwards, but let's just keep thinking of the overall main shapes. Okay, and again, that's exciting V shape is gorgeous. I quite like a light rock at the bottom left corner, which might give us something more of a foreground to show maybe a bit more space and light and kind of the depth of everything. And there is a similar, almost like a parallel little line for the light, far kind of more in the depth again. Maybe there is a rock just catching a bit of light, but also have that almost like a step and a step and a step within our composition here as well. Okay, they're roughly about the same size, kind of the gaps in between them, but whatever is going to be details, more details around, we'll make sure that don't look too repetitive. Right, now let's have a look at sub-steps within our mountains, our nice rocky areas. There is a sub-level somewhere here on the high top of the mountain, So there are a couple of houses, there are a couple of bigger rocks there, but let's just see it as a big shape again and where it's going to stop, not quite coming up to the edge we sketched earlier for the rock behind it. And that will give us an opportunity to decide where that smaller segment of a rock standing out and this big white gap will then eventually have a bit more of a silhouette for us. Okay. And as I've done a big flat line for the top here, I might differentiate it by using maybe a little bit more violet and green. I just want to put a couple of big plants as slightly darker segments. Hello, I'm just going to stop for a moment, everybody. Right, so I mixed a little bit of green and violet just to get some of the shapes for our trees. We've got a nice big chunk of a tree, so then we don't need to think about its line. What we think about is volume, how big it's going to be, and maybe a rough size, or or also kind of where the maybe the houses behind it's going to be. So we're thinking of the darknesses rather than line. Okay, so I might have some sort of houses below there. Okay, and we also have a couple of marks for the trees above, which again just give us, oh, okay, maybe slightly, I just move that slightly lower, sorry, slightly on the left. So then we have a nice change of darkness, just a little bit more here. Okay. And I also want to make, again, under these segments, where do we have some of the darkness on the mountain? Now, because this is all quite vague, we're looking for overall big shape. It doesn't matter if you've got textures, you're doing this little kind of sketch planning, and that's all good. Could have picked up even a bigger brush. So all of that one might be our darkness here. I think I will pick up a slightly bigger brush. So mainly violet and emerald green with a bit of water. If one color dominates the other in some places, that's fine as well. So in some places I have a little bit more violet, and some places I have a little bit more green. As I'm mixing that color and spreading it, that's all good. So I'm more interested into seeing that light space separating from a bit of a shadow. And all of this will more or less come together darker. Okay. And there will be some other shadows on the rocks, but so far I'm looking for the darks, perhaps from the vegetations, from the trees, from vegetation, from the grasses on the rocks. So those type of greens are actually looking maybe at the moment even darker than anything else. And there is another corner. It makes us look more into the depths of the painting. It makes us investigate a little bit more. Okay, maybe something a bit more here. And all of this area again is going to be dark. So my color perhaps looks quite dark on the screen, but I know when it dries, it will be reasonably pale. All I'm interested in is the shape of those darks. All I'm interested into the shape of those exciting segments than anything else. For instance, going to be up and down with light here as well, maybe a little bit more of a highlights, but overall it's going to be a nice dark chunk of rock. Okay. And then I can be back with my thinner brush. And let's finish a silhouette for the mountain at the back. Can make it nice and exciting. So I'm looking at that little silhouette there. Quite exciting. Tops there. And then the whole valley, there will be some houses, but we'll paint them quite simplified, but it's more so again something greener part of the valley there. So I'm going to keep it as an overall big shape, maybe of a paler diluted tone so we can see that. Okay. So it gives us a little bit more clearer but simplified segments of how when we start looking at them and developing our own color scheme here. Right, so let's just talk through the concept of what we're going to try to plan up, kind of how we're going to work with our colors. The distant sky and the mountains, the far end looks much more cooler. There is a nice big shadow, maybe there will be some extra warmth in the village, but more light than the rocks. But overall, the backdrop feels like it could be cooler. To make it in stronger contrast, we need to make sure that our rocks are going to be very warm. So loads of reds, oranges, violets, browns could come into this one. Okay. And again, to contrast and offset it, our greens, our big shadows, again, could have a little bit more coolness. Within each group of colors, of course, we can have a little bit more warmth, a little bit more coolness to make up the variety of it. But overall, if we'll think of our rocks and houses close to us here on the left-hand side as warmer ones, so is the peak here, and what's behind much more cooler. Almost like an oasis behind, that would be fantastic. So I'd love to start with a little bit of light and a little bit of coolness. So the light is going to be our sky. So that's probably going to be one of the lightest segments, as well as possibly our foreground on the bottom left corner, and perhaps our city eventually, well, town, village. Also will have some more light. The rest are going to be our medium tones, are going to be our rocks, and the most dark tones are going to be our greens and the shadows. Okay, so let's start with a bit of a sky. I'm going to go for a flat brush. I'm going to use some white, and I'm going to use a little bit of phthalo blue. Okay, so higher up in the sky, we're going to have a slightly darker blue. Now, against my gray, this blue will start looking quite pale. So until I get more color on my board, my camera will not be able to, well, we can just about see that blueness. It's not super light, but it sometimes can do that. Right, so a little bit more paint. So I'm going for the top of the sky, just white and phthalo blue, not overly dark, because we need to make sure it's one of our lightest areas. Okay. To make it slightly varied, I can introduce a slightly, just an extra dab of blue here, to make the tone of the blue slightly darker. And a couple of my strokes might just vary here and there, with a slightly lighter tone. So it will be very gentle, but just about visible. Because once we're going lower, I'd like us to use a dab of emerald green with the blue. So we're moving into a very slight turquoise color, but we need to make it lighter. So I need to introduce, excuse me, a little bit more white here. Okay, so, and then it gently blends because my paint is still damp. And this is going to be a gap between the rocks, so I can paint even that space. So the sky doesn't have any clouds, but the glow of it next to our rocks will be quite significant. If I'm painting behind the trees here and my trees shrunk in size, that's absolutely fine. I'd prefer to do that at any time because we haven't really done the trees yet. But it gives me an opportunity to shape a little bit more my rocks. And again, if they're slightly, for example, the gap I painted between the rocks is not going to be as big, but I can shrink it. At least I've got a nice chunk of light there, and I can shrink it later on when I start painting the rocks. And again, the lower I'm going to go towards the horizon, which we can't quite see where the horizon is, just somewhere below there. The lighter color, bluey green, I'm going to use. So I'm just increasing the amount of white for the lower areas here. Again, if I'll go a little bit higher just to touch up my sky here, I'm going tiny bit more darker again. And because my lines, my strokes are not perfect vertical or horizontal, I'm kind of dabbing in and out slightly different directions. It's create that gentle mist of a hot day. Yeah, so the same, I can just a little vary my that surface. Again, probably on the camera it will be harder for you to see, but I'm going to give it a go. So if in this medium area of the sky, middle area, if I were to put a little bit more partially stronger turquoise or partially stronger blue, couple of strokes here and there, just making sure that the surface is not transparent for me and not seeing that background gray too much, or just varying that color. I'm just picking up a bit of wet paint from the line of my mountains. My mountain look a little silly, but again, I'm not worried about that. Once I start painting it, I'll improve its silhouette. Okay, just checking if there are any perhaps silly lines. Maybe that one started to appear more of almost like a shape of a cloud, which is quite nice. That's okay. Maybe I can do something similar here. So the depth of the sky, it's flattish in appearance, but there is something, a little bit of that variety is happening there as well. If you're going slightly too dark, you can always bring tiny bit more white and make that change happen. I'm mainly checking as well if anything too transparent, or if I didn't use thick enough layer for it to stand out later on and show too much gray. Okay, I'm happy with that. And while we're using the blue, let's paint our distant mountain. So our sky, in comparison to the photograph, already much more vibrant, very gentle, but it's not just plain gray and quite whitish gray, okay? We've got a little bit of the depth because we're anticipating the heat of the rocks we'll be painting shortly. Now, if I painted the sky with phthalo blue and emerald green, so making those turquoise colors, it's more of a cooler blue, yeah, kind of more into the green blue. I'm going to paint my distant mountain a slightly different blue. I'm going to go for more ultramarine. So ultramarine is slightly closer to violet. So let's use ultramarine for the mountain, distant mountain. So some white and some ultramarine. If you don't have enough, if the paint doesn't last you too long when you mix in, it means that you need more volume of paint. Pick up a little bit extra white, pick up a little bit of extra ultramarine. Okay, it's not going to be just that color, but if we start with it, we can add another color or a couple of colors to it afterwards. So what I'd like to do, I'd like just to establish its form, yeah, establish its silhouette, shape. So a flat shape first. And I'm interested to see how that color will start appearing against my pale sky. Okay. How it's actually quite glowing. And because we sketched the outer line of the mountain with a darker line, so if you have a little bit of darkness there, that's okay. If we need to gently reshape more of a character, steps, well, I definitely need to. You might have been much more accurate with your, when you were painting the sky. Okay, so I think that's a little better here. As an overall shape. You can also see maybe a little bit of that blue might be somewhere further down in some of the greens. Just shows quite exciting, beautiful light there. Okay. And to show slight hint of extra depth there, if I were to use a dab more of ultramarine and a dab of black, which I haven't got on my palette yet. So let's just introduce a little bit of black. Excuse me. Drop my paint. So just a small dab of black. So it becomes more grayish blue, kind of close to perhaps indigo. I'm going to check how much darker that is. That might be a little bit too dark. So let's go back to some more white. Let's go back to some more ultramarine. Again, let's test it against, okay, maybe a little bit more white still. Black is very powerful. Just want to make a small change Okay, that's perhaps better. So there will be some sub shapes. Okay, it's maybe too light now. So just a little bit of kind of that in between. So just about seeing some shapes, just very gently. Perhaps some of the ridges. I'm just picking up some of the heights within the mountain, just doing a few vertical strokes, and then picking up maybe some shadows of more elongated, almost horizontal, kind of diagonally horizontal shapes. So then in the distance, we don't see it too flat, but at the same time, we don't see too bold light. There is some buzzing going on, but very, very gentle. Okay. That's quite nice. I might just put some extra couple of blue shapes here. So when I do my greens, it might just give me a reminder that my greens might need to be slightly cooler there. Okay. Right, now let's have a look at our rocks and let's paint them as a big group of silhouettes, and there's a big group which has slightly lighter, slightly darker tones. I'm going to top up my white actually, because I will need quite a bit of that. If I have quite a lot of blue, let's say, next to my white, maybe I also need to have separate white where I'll be mixing using my brush with warm colors, so that blue doesn't spoil my warm tones there. Right, so some fresh white, and let's get some ochre. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just mix a couple of maybe 3 colors, and we're probably going to be using them as we moving from one color for the rocks to the other. So just plain ochre and white, and some crimson. So I just put a little corner of it. I can always add more, but crimson is a powerful color, so small quantities initially used. Okay, I think that might be quite a good color. Okay, and I'm going to use the same for the next one, but it's going to have more proportion of the crimson. So there is still ochre, but the proportion of red is much more powerful. There's still a bit of white, because that gives us the base. Okay. And another color I'm going to make, again, the same 3 components are present: some white, some ochre, some crimson, and a dab of violet. So those pools of color will be very exciting. And if in the past we worked with one color, we mixed one color and we applied it, we mixed maybe another close to it color, we applied it and worked that way around. I want us to have a few of these colors available first, before we start getting them on our surface in our painting. Now they look good to me on the palette, but I might need to place them on my painting to find out if they're going to work for us or not. That's quite nice warmth. I think that would be quite nice. But I can also see some of the other colors could be even cooler. Okay. So the last one is white, ochre, crimson, and violet. So we've got 3 colors in white. So it's not super dark. On the white palette, it might appear dark, but it's not super dark. And I might just start working with it. I don't think I'll need a lot of it so far, but I can see some of the highlights of my blocks, which could have big shapes of light. So how about if we just place some of it in those exciting areas, maybe as little blocks of color here and there. So I'm just finding the little corners, little segments. If you do more or a little bit less than I will do, that's okay. If you see it elsewhere where I haven't seen, that will be quite exciting to compare. I think there's some sort of maybe runny, kind of where maybe the water runs over the cliff edges somewhere here. So it looks quite a different in color block. I'm making it slightly bigger than I perhaps need to, but I think that will be a good one to exaggerate the color. And there is a nice light also created on the border with some shadows. Okay. That's good. I'm going to come back to the lighter tones. I will need them, lighter tones and lighter color mixes we created, but I'm going to keep them available for later. Because another warm color we need is much more violet-y. So if I haven't washed my brush from the last color, I'm just going to add more violet to my brush full of the previous paint. So there is a little presence of yellow, ochre, there is a presence of red, there is a presence of white. I just went for direct violet here. And that color might be slightly too dark to what we need. So let's have a dab of white with it. I'm using a big brush so that color mixing is a little bit more quick and efficient. Okay, that's good. And I think more or less the rest of our shadows will be painted with this color, and we'll just divide it later on. So I'm interested into this lovely outstanding piece of rock and maybe the gap between the rock next to it and where it might almost touch and where that silhouette is going to separate. Okay. And the silhouette of that rock on the other side, and where it's getting slightly wider. Now, if your paint on the background dried, so if you're making any mistakes, you can wipe shapes off and just change them. So it feels quite nice and warm, hot silhouette here. Okay. And we can fill our gray blocks of what we haven't painted in the background for the other sections of the rocks here on the left. So I'm leaving the shapes of the trees out for now and just simply blocking the rest. Again, just for simplicity for now. And also this corner of the rock. If you're running out of paint, just go for some fresh violet and then just a small amount perhaps from your last paint mixture. So if you don't arrive in the exact same color, it's okay as well to have the variety. A slightly different option. I might break this one down gently, although it's not important at the moment because we will be working into it a little bit more afterwards. And again, I want to probably use some of that warmth of light, a little bit more here at the base, or even a little more here where the sun is going to expose part of the rock. Okay. Now some of my shapes might be much more sharper and standing out. Stronger, some might be a little bit more blending within my previous orangey brown. Both are good. And as we're just building up the tones, it's all fine here. Okay, I have left a little bit of other gaps of the gray because I can see we can have even cooler color within that warmth. So we'll be subdividing those shapes as well. Okay. Now if I were to dilute this color even more with white, so I'm just adding more solid white. I'm saying dilute because it's same color but less saturation because I'm adding more white. I think I'm more or less right for the color of the rock here on the foreground, which again I can work into more texture and more subcolors used but for now, as a blocky color, as a block, as a bit more distinguished shape, I think that would be a good placement for it here. So it's not too warm, it's a little bit neutral. Okay. I can see tiny bit of that light, same light, just somewhere here. Our rocks are in the shadow. Okay, it comes up very wide because of my size of my brush, and my paints are still wet behind, so underneath. But I just want to bring some of that light here. I can shrink that area afterwards. So I'm working for that light immediately. Okay. So it connects it a little. Perhaps as the light a little more here, again, which is slightly exaggerated in width, and perhaps the light, I'm not sure if it's going to be that color, but at least it's a light point. Yeah, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, something developing to the distance. I might even make a couple of blocks for the village, for the houses at the back. Again, we will vary those houses as in shapes, as in colors, but that might be a good starting point, seeing a bit of warmth as initial plan, as initial shape of color. Okay. Now I'd like us to go into slightly cooler version of our browns. I'd love us to go with some more violet, some white, and perhaps a little bit of cooler color. So if I'll go for some ultramarine, it will start looking very bold and blue, but then I'm going to mix it with some of our warmer colors. So perhaps just a small dab of any of our warmer pre-mixed colors, just a little bit. So we'll start giving us more of a bluey gray, bluey browny, kind of more of a kind of silvery color. So it's not just as bold and strong and blue, but it has that purpley grayish color. Okay. So if I were to put it next to some of my stronger oranges, it will work really well with it. It doesn't have to be very dark, although we can make a darker version of it as well. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to first of all fill in any gaps I have got left of the background grays on this, on my rocks. Okay, so any of those ones here. I can shrink my, okay, my pinky shape here is still very wet. So maybe I'll have to come back to it. And I'm going to look for perhaps a little bit of little top edges of light. I think, yes, this one's going to be a little more tricky to work over as it's still wet. I'll persevere a little bit and perhaps use a hairdryer. Okay. I think that's okay. Okay. And let's introduce how we were doing something similar to what we did to the distant mountain. Maybe just a little stroke. It might be not huge in change of the darkness. It might be very similar to the darkness of our browns, our existing browns, but it will be sub-color. So we can find little ridges, little straighter blocks, little sub blocks. Maybe one of the blocks of the houses here, or if you're not sure which one is a house, which one is a rock, just look for some of the just sub shapes. They don't have to be perfect, just look for variety. Yeah, maybe just a little mark, maybe just a little corner, maybe just a line. Okay, looks like there's something, maybe a little bit of light, not direct light, but overall from the sky will have more light. So it's something on the border here where the more of a plateau area, sort of a sheer drop. Looks like some of the gaps I haven't painted at the bottom here might have that color as well, just a little extra coolness. Okay, so we're cooling off that rocky surface. Again, if I'm running out of color, I need to top it up. Some violet, some ultramarine, some white, and a dab of one of our warmer colors. I can see another, perhaps a corner of my rock. Perhaps a little edge of a flatter exposed surface on here. Okay, so quite a tricky subtones. So seeing it as different color is exciting. So we're not changing it light or dark, we're changing it in color. Okay. And I think I can also do with a similar color on the opposite rocks, which will have quite a lot of vegetation, but also just a little surface rocks. Peeping out from underneath of the plants. Just clench into that heat of the rock. some dry trees at the bottom as well. Just gonna use a little bit of a dry strokes. So we worked with quite a lot of medium tones. Our sky was light. The rest of our tones were medium. And we're coming close to start working with our darks. As I'm on my rock color of that darker violet tone, as I will start painting the shadows of the trees climbing over the rocks. I'm also, the more I'm looking into the photograph, the more I'm spotting some of the partially exposed rocks surrounded by the greens. And it has a very similar color to what we just used, that violet and ultramarine and a bit of warmth, a slightly darker version of it. So I need a little bit more white still. As I'm running out, I'm going to top it up. So violet, ultramarine, a little bit of our warm color. If you run out of any of our warm colors, just pick up a dab of ochre and crimson, and you'll be back to where you need to be. Okay, it might be a little bit too dark if I were to place it here. Yeah, perhaps just a little too dark. Quite a nice strong color though. Quite like that. Yeah, I think perhaps that's better. So I'm going to find a few shadows within the trees, or even almost like prepare my shadows on the rocks before painting the trees on top of it. So let's prepare some of the cliff edges. And also might paint a little borders where our greens are going to meet more exposed rock, or maybe there will be some extra texture perhaps. So maybe some of the borders where some of the greens will be interacting with the kind of those almost shadows on the rocks from the greens. Again, that could come in the form of lines. Or little sub-blocks. Okay, that might be a bit too much. Any of the shadows where some of the trees just give away the depth. So that violet color gives us that extra depth and volume of color. And I might partially use it as a shadow to offset my rock, which is pulling away. At some point it will have to collapse or break, but so far standing strong. But has that subtone. all of that extra violet here. Okay, I might have used too much of the violet here, but I'm gonna let it settle and see. Some of these crevasses as well. So I'm leaving our initial lighter violet blue in smaller quantities and just overlapping partially some of it, textures. Now, if at any point you need to dry your painting because its previous layers are a bit too wet, just stop and get a hairdryer, or maybe just work on the different areas and come back to the currently damp sections afterwards. And finally, something on this end. On the bottom right hand side, something quite big. And tiny touches on the border with our lighter block. Again, maybe just a little dabs and variety to show them the depth. And then we can stop. So it might look a little bit messy stage, but the depth is now present. We're ready for the extra dark, and we also will be ready for bringing some more precise lighter strokes and working into the lighter greens as well, and into the village behind, and starting working into the nuances. So quite a tricky stage, going through all these browns, lighter browns, more violety ones, more pinkier, and where to put them. So just constantly looking for that slight change, what's slightly cooler, what's slightly darker, what's slightly warmer, what's slightly lighter, kind of playing with all of that, giving yourself a little bit of freedom to experiment and seeing what strokes will lead you to certain shapes. The photograph just guides us, generally gives us some ideas and information, but the painting, that's where we thrive, and that's where we take that leap of faith and trust into our brushes in our hands. Right, okay. Let's give you some time to finish this stage. Now let's go for our greens, and let's go for extra darker tones and then build up some of the lighter tones for the greens, okay? So this time I picked up a filbert brush, so it's a flat brush with a round end. It's slightly bigger from my previous, sorry, slightly smaller than my previous flat brush, but so will give me an opportunity to do a bit more rounder shapes for some of the trees, or kind of the strokes could be a little bit more roundly applied. Right, so I'm going to go for similar colors to what we used earlier, but they will go a little bit more intense and a bit more powerful, less diluted. So I've got some white, I have some emerald green, so that looks very fluorescent and a bit odd at the moment. And I'm going to go for some violet. Okay, so because I use quite a bit of white, the color looks quite transparent. No, not transparent, looks quite still bold and light. So the more pigment of green and violet I get in this mixture, the stronger that intensity of the blue will become. Okay, And if I were to put it against some of my background, it will start appearing partially, perhaps a little bit too light in places. So I'll need to go even more violet. Just a dab of water to keep my paint slightly easier to mix. I think that's better. And I'll start working with, okay, I need a tiny bit more violet on my palette. So it's quite a deep emerald green, deep, something between deep green and deep violet. So let's go for those shadows, those intensive shadows. If you want just to watch me doing a few strokes, maybe on a corner here, and then join me, and I'll give you some extra time to work. But it might give you an opportunity how to, might be the direction of the strokes I'll be applying that greeny violet. So for example, if I've got some of the trees going up this cliff, I'm almost like planting them, I'm almost spreading them over some of my darker violety shadows. Okay, I can work into part of my tree here. Again, I'm ignoring the highlights for now. I will come back to the highlights later. So far, I'm just looking for the most dark shapes. I'm going to see how maybe this block of darks will develop. And I'm almost like helping myself. One shape is moving to another. Yeah, how they just maybe cluster on one part of the rock. Is it going to be above my shadow or below my highlight? I'm almost establishing some sub gaps, where I can see some of that violet, where I can see the previous grays, or where I can see some other colors we might have left. Some of this one is just not connected yet, so let's maybe put it a little bit more together. Again, it's more shows that vegetation, those plants crawling up and down the slopes, just developing here and there much more naturally. If I'm meeting just a wet segment of paint, I'm just going to blend it together so it doesn't appear too separate. Okay. And then I'll do similar, a little bit simpler version of the same greens on my opposite wall. And that opposite wall might even have stronger darkness on that contrast just on the edge. And then back to more softer greeny violet. Again, I will try to leave some of the exposed rock. Perhaps just play with the strokes if it's hard to understand where those shapes might be. Kind of follow. I can see a little bit of light here. What can I do here? Can I just support some of the strokes a little bit more diagonally here? If I've got two similar shapes, can I break one narrow to another one's a bit more bigger? Can I subdivide? Maybe I'll leave it more exposed rock. Okay, it's harder for you to see here now. Okay, it's a bit better. I'll lift my board so it doesn't reflect. Okay. So everything becomes quite dark, but we just need to be patient before we can make some extra highlights. just bringing back maybe a little bit of that vegetation on the area above. There might be, I might deliberately leave extra those violets here. And I also added a tiny dab of white to my violet green. So then the contrasts, especially on the top of this right-hand side rock, are just a little gentler than they're here at the bottom, when they're much more significant. So they're mingling between the purples, they're mingling between the lighter, darker versions. Because again, they become of a similar darkness, but of a different color. We partially lose them, and that's okay. That's kind of the intention of it, just to create that variety without following the perfect pattern. Okay, I've got a little dark segment which I haven't paid attention to. Just work over it a little. So checking if there's anything I've painted, so I've left out and might need to be touched up. I think some of my untouched first quick layers of watery paint earlier on still visible here, so I might just partially hide them. Quite like partially it's staying diluted, right? And then the that valley, so I need to make sure that I can see that valley a little bit more stronger. So a couple of, I think it's 3 little in rocky formation, one behind another. Again, it looks like partially trees or just that leaning very close to vegetation leaning close to the rocks. I'm painting them as silhouettes of darkness. I haven't done any highlights on them yet. And also that silhouette will sharpen up my rocky edge here. Okay. Might separate that plateau slightly different afterwards, but for now it's all good. Okay, I probably said it quite a few times today. I'll leave it for later. I'll leave it for later. We'll have a look at it afterwards. And sometimes I don't come back to it because everything's settled and it's found its own place. But if it stands out or needs more attention, then it definitely will need to be returned to. I think I can put a couple of individual plants clinging to the rocks. That just gives that kind of character to that area, where some individual small groups of plants get themselves attached. Yeah. almost like a little dotty areas. Okay, that's looking good. That's looking good. They're not too perfectly similar, if we can help it. There might be more of a line, there might be a bit more of a dot, it might be a slightly lighter version of it. Maybe picking up a small brush will be a good idea as well. If I'm doing it in a slightly lighter tone, means I might need to work into my lighter version of a green. Okay. Also give me a reminder that I haven't done my trees right at the top. I think I might need a smaller brush for that. There's also a filbert brush, but just a very tiny one. So then I can do those smaller silhouettes of the trees. Okay, so let's start looking more as they're growing into that area. Quite like the darker tone as well for perhaps a couple of windows. If we're painting more, making a village to look like it's the houses are climbing up. Again, you don't have to make sure, oh, is that specific area where the window is, or is that the window, is that the house, is that which part is beginning, which part is the end. It's more of a suggestive planning. So it's, oh, is there something there? Oh, there's something else there. Might even put some extra of my own windows to have that dynamic. Sorry, come out a little bit too dark. I might just soften it so it doesn't jump at us and doesn't compete with my windows or big shadows. Again, I only realize it when I paint to the next stage, but that's okay. I can just soften that. That's fine. Okay, so I've got some nice, strong, big, bold darks. Fantastic. Right, when the darker greens are ready, we can work now gently into the warm tops of them and build up to those highlights where the sun is just catching it. But just to give it slightly more volume, while I still have my large brush in that color, all I want to do is to add a dab of white, and it will give me this good quality gray, which I can still mix with a small volume of emerald green. So it's more of a gray green, okay? And I want to use it again for little dabs of kind of preparational light for some of my shadows, just a small quantity. So I'm not going to put a lot of it, but just probably borders, border sections where some of the light might appear. It will shift our shadows towards the light. It will give us much more space. So when the warm highlights will come in, they will be much more prepared for it, and they will be much more softer. The depths of everything will be much more significant. So it's like sub-cooler light. So just about we can see, maybe I'll have tiny bit of it somewhere here. And I'm using the brush with tiny bit of extra water, so it's not overwhelming in the kind of in the volume of the paint. It settles in, it interacts a bit more. Partially my darker greens are still damp, so it just settles much more gentler. Okay, it separates anything we need to. That also gives us that extra color to the painting, yeah? If I do my top tree here, again, I'll do just a little bit of sub-levels of those beautiful pine branches. Almost like little extra skirts there. And perhaps a little bit more that coolness on the rocks here, because they're not going to have perhaps as much warmth in this section, but we need a little bit of extra light. So those purples and stronger greens, we start reading them a bit more bolder. Might even make a tiny bit more sublighter here as well. Okay, that's probably enough. Is there a small plant or something here? What do you think? Grayish subtones, that's really quite nice, almost turquoisey slant on all of that coolness. This is quite actually exciting color to go next to some of those warmths. Is it just a gray part of the rock which has that light on it? Is it more vegetation? Is it more sandy banks of the cliffs which are in the shadows? I think that's quite nice actually as well. It's almost like that borderline between the warm light and the borderline between them, the shadow. You can even see it slightly, this kind of bluey gray, sorry, greeny gray, maybe on the border next to our distant mountain. I think it might be a little fresh actually, with the village. A little fresher means more emerald green, less gray, and a dab more white. I think I'm going to introduce that one to give that extra glow for the distance. That's gorgeous, yeah? So that's where our colors are ready to be manipulated and start singing. I think that's gonna be coming up. Very exciting. It's almost close to the colors of my sky, but if I have overdone them, I might touch them up later on. I think it should If I just blend it at the top here, I'm washing my brush in some water to have a little gentle interaction of the higher strong white pigment I applied on my mountain, so it's not too jumpy. I just had to put too sharp a line. It was getting too similar as a shape as well, so I think that's better. That's better. I'm gonna let it settle and dry, but there is a bit of a glow now in preparation for the village. Right, very exciting. Right, next step, I'm gonna go for my warmer greens. So I'm gonna go for some white, some emerald green, and some ochre. Okay, and that will come, if we'll introduce it too strongly, might come very foreign. So let's have perhaps a dab of red. We'll just make it a little bit more orangey, because we're going to start with the darkest version of the warm highlights. Okay, again, build them up even lighter and more sunny and more greeny, more yellowy. So for example, I have a lovely block of that green that looks amazingly bold and bright, even before I've done anything else, any other highlights. So that's why my prepare kind of a little bit of orange here, a little bit of extra the lights. If it stands out too much, don't be scared of adding tiny bit more green and tiny bit more red and tiny bit more ochre, so the whole color is slightly darker, so it just interacts easier with our dark tones. Might even use slightly diluted paint just to get it across into my other greens here, just gently, just to get it part of that environment. At the same time, this is mainly our light corners, so perhaps a little touch. I think those are settled much better because the lighter tones of them cooler bluey gray, yeah, greeny blue, is really exciting here. They're similar in more darkness so far. Okay, any other ones? Perhaps just tiny little touch somewhere here, and it might stay in that shadow here. When something here across, I'll start from this initial more duller color and I will build up much more stronger. Same as some of these ones, will eventually have a little dab of sunnier light. Something again, a little bit more here. Perhaps a little hint of that light just to show the valley is going really low. More showing the direction of that development. Excuse me. We're suddenly starting to have a bit of depth. So once our initial darker version of highlights introduced, we can then start adding fresher green, so we have more white and more ochre and very little darkness left. But will come in much more smaller quantities of dabs of that light. We were just starting to travel in much smaller volumes. It's like, oh, is it just touching it here? Oh, it's not quite catching anything there at all. Well, this ones will stay much more duller, and this ones will brighten up. So it's almost that light comes out. You can also swap brush and work with much smaller strokes. Again, showing that very small angle of the light which the valleys catches, because it's all turned away from that sunshine. So we're against the light. And if we are working into gentler introduction of the light, so it's not a huge contrast. So we had a darker green, then more slightly lighter one, then a little bit darker, sorry, a little bit light and a little bit light, and those, the more of those varieties of subtones you can have, the much more natural that build up will be. So let's say if you've got 5 or 6 variations of tones, it will look much more gentle and pleasing to the eye, much more natural than if you have just 2 or 3. My poplar tree might just have a very, very small silhouette, if any. Just exaggerating there. Light as well, but I don't want them to be left without the light. Okay, now this highlights again. If I'm putting a lighter tone and it just looks too bold, maybe I need to come back, step back to build that gentler change of light before stronger highlights. Only after that, picking up a bit more brighter silhouettes, almost like a little outline of that light. If we overwork them by any at any stage, just bringing up some slightly darker green and just smudging into that area, bringing a bit more shadow, will be more important than trying to persevere, making it lighter and lighter. I might just lose the whole shape there. So bringing back the basics, the shadows, and then getting slowly back to the highlights. Okay, so we're starting to have those highlights now more stronger of the greens. Any stage, if any of my silhouettes of light green become too sharp and intrusive, I can just use a clean brush and just blend my light using water, so it just blends within a dark environment. The sharp edges, at least from the shadow side, has disappeared. That's really exciting. Right, now I'll need 2 smaller brushes to work for the final stages, and I'll be using quite a bit of white. Now, I want to lighten up some of the foreground part of the rock here, some of those little highlights, and work a little bit more into the impression of the village behind, and then come back to some of the tops and some of the ridges, which might have a little bit of extra light as well. So working with quite a bit of white now. So I have some fresh white, and I'm going to pick up a dab of pink. Okay, that's quite a strong pink. Okay, so just making sure it's more of an off-white pink. And I'm going to work with few strokes. I'm going to wipe my brush and almost try to go for some dry brushing and just see how some of the texture of the rock might reflect into my strokes. So I don't have to do it all similar, but some of the areas will be more solid and some of the areas might be a bit more textured. Okay, at any stage I don't like it, I can wipe it off with my sponge or the cloth and work back, but that's immediately giving me some boldness to the light. That, oh my god, it's sunny and shining and everything's quite heated up. We're just on at the side of the shadows. Right, so I've got this lovely pink area of light. So if I were to put this again, that very whitish pink as a small, more solid line, yeah, that's lightened up. Maybe a little dab of a stroke, very narrow, coming across down here. That's just immediately just kind of jumped into that. Maybe a little white line, well, that pinky white, close to the village here. Yeah. For the towns and buildings here, I might just do a little bit of dry brush and few strokes, just to give me an opportunity to be more free rather than painting every individual house. Maybe it will be a row of houses, then maybe there will be a group of them clustering in different hills or segments. Maybe we can see part of the walls in some areas more than the other ones, a bit more covered. Yeah, so the little lines and shapes give that sudden light in that valley. Okay. And again, a similar I might do a dab of violet and again dilute it quite a lot with some white. So my pink is not just a single type of color pink. And I go further, maybe the gap between my two rocks could have even more light. And look how the depth immediately builds up. If my mountain perhaps going and should be seen there, I might even put a mountain there, but I think I might create extra light and drop. I might do both. I might drop my mountain here and then eventually have a look if that blue will need to travel further. Yeah, you just create that wow depth. Yeah, and perhaps even a little light coming through it. Suddenly I have the shape of the rock in front of me, right? If I'll go for very diluted ultramarine with white, I can start doing little plateaus and sub plateaus maybe at the top. Maybe tiny bit more darker version ultramarine, and that's quite a lot, sorry. Ultramarine and a dab of violet, but quite a lot of white. Just wanted to have a very pale, but not overly white appearing look. That's a bit better. But still a little too strong shape. So it's, oops, let's wipe this off. I picked up unwanted color by accident, so I just wipe it off. So maybe a little platter, maybe a little something. Okay, that's a bit better. Just want to create a slight uneven look than too perfect. And I want to show some more of these rooftops, or if they are partially rooftops, partially tops of them, rocks, where the light might be just catching some sort of light, maybe part of a stronger wall. So it's cool area. At the same time, gives us the subtones, so now look more at my painting, and I stop looking at my photograph for the comparison. I want to see what's happening on my painting. Any little protruding rocks out closer to the possible light, just exposing tops, little platform, little that's good. Tiny bit more. Maybe going back to that very pale pink and touching up just very small edges, little dots, little, yeah, just gives that a hint of extra light. That's all good. Anything else? Maybe slightly thick white. If I just dump that one in, that's good. Any other sharper corners? So stepping away from the work for final nuances will be exciting. Maybe I'm going to be brave and have another little sharp ridge here. With that light, I think it will work quite nicely with those beautiful extra light tones. Sub blues, sub shapes there, that'd be good maybe. Okay. Some nice exciting ultramarine at the front as well. I think for some of the shadows that might be quite good, but not too much. Okay, right, lean forward again. Sorry, lean away, step away. It feels like I could do it with a couple of strokes somewhere here to sharpen up this area, this valley. Gorge. Just making sure that makes sense. Any of these softer corners could be slightly sharper, pointy. Okay, that looks quite a nice, exciting cliff. But now it's all too tiny and too precise, which not overly significant. I think this edge come out a little bit too strong. So if I'll tame it back, and I think I'm ready to stop. I could have played with more details on the buildings, but I think that's pretty good and exciting. We haven't used much of our pre-mixed orangey reds, and this is where I could have used it a little bit of, yeah, I think that's perfect for part of my city village, or part even my rock, but so small in not overwork it. It's more of a glow, extra glow of light, and that slightly darker orangey color, which is there, but it just that final little dab just to make our earlier reds slightly more wonderful and strong. That's where the stages of the boldness now color will be supported by all the colors we worked into. It's just becoming extra powerful. Quite like this one now here as well. So that focus is staying into this beautiful area. It's almost like the color is beaming from underneath rather than from the sunshine. And I'm going to stop at that. So that beautiful, beautiful orange and browns are there as illuminating light from underneath of our shadows. So thank you very much for today. The build-up was longer and more perhaps even frustrating. The last stage is coming back with the gorgeous strong colors is the most exciting, and it's when painting becomes alive and we suddenly turn the corner from the shadows to the fantastic lights. So thank you very much for being with me today, and I look forward to seeing your work in the future and seeing how it develops.